Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by DevonThink and Linode. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is my co-host, Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hey, John, how are you?
I'm doing all right. We're getting to that time of year, where I just start getting really excited about WWDC. I mean, it's Christmas time for us, right? I mean, this is the event that will drive the rest of what we do for 2019 and on into 2020. So there's a lot of anticipation that goes into that. And you had a fantastic idea the other day, which is, what we ought to do is we ought to start thinking about our wish list for iOS in particular, because the rumors are at least that iOS 13 is going to be a big deal, especially on the iPad, right?
Yeah, and it's always that fun time of the year when, we have some wishes sort of left over from the past couple of years, especially because the iPad didn't get much of an upgrade in iOS 12 in 2018. And also we're starting to hear the first rumors usually from Mark Gurman at Bloomberg, of what the next version of iOS is going to have. And I think this is going to be a fun year because last year we got shortcuts. We didn't get much on the iPad itself, but at least we got the Shortcuts app.
Yep.
But this time, not only does it seem like we'll keep getting updates to the Shortcuts app because the team is still working on it, but we'll also get major new features for iPad from, the rumors are saying improvements to file management, improvements to the home screen, and improvements to productivity in the sense of multitasking with apps and multiple tabs or windows for apps. So I thought, why don't we start a sort of mini series, if you will, where we can talk about some of the things that we would like to see in iOS 13, and we can have more episodes before WWDC in the spring. We can talk about other aspects of iOS that we wanna talk about. I, for example, want to talk about family sharing eventually. But today I thought, why don't we start from the two big things that we want to see in iOS 13, improvements to files and improvements to the home screen on the iPad.
Yes, these are probably two of my biggest wishes when it comes to what I'd like to see in iOS 13. And we ought to just dive right into files because there's a lot here that could be improved. I really like the Files app. I use it regularly now, but it still needs a lot of work to be anywhere near as versatile and flexible as the Finder on the Mac. And, the reason to me why this is an important issue on iOS is because not all of your work is app-centric, right? I mean, there are projects that require you to do things like edit images or create documents or do something, deal with audio files. What I like to do, and maybe this is just, someone who's coming from the Mac originally to iOS, but I like to sometimes have a folder full of all the files related to that particular project. And, having an app-centric view of that, which is where we came from at the beginning of iOS, doesn't always work super well. There's a little bit of friction. So there's a lot of things that I think Apple can do to still maintain the ability to start in apps and use that as your starting point for getting work done, but also to promote the ability for maybe pro users or anybody who comes at work from a slightly different angle of project-based, folder-based type of organization to make that work too. And one of the things that I want to see first and foremost is the ability to sort my files and folders in more ways. I mean, we've got alphabetical and dates basically as it is with iOS. And if you look at the Mac, you've got things like kind, which we don't have on iOS. You've got date last open, date added, date modified, date created. I mean, size and tags. That's a lot of different ways to sort your files. And I'd like to see more of those come to iOS so you can kind of slice and dice your information and make sure what you're looking at is at the top of your list. It's something that I do all the time on the Mac is go into the Finder and add a column for a particular aspect of a file and then sort by that criteria. And it's a great way to figure out exactly where your files are. I think I'd also like to see better search functionality. I mean, we have tokenized search capability in Photos already, right? We don't have that in Files. And that exists on the Mac. You can search by kind, You can search by all sorts of other criteria, whether it's the date opened or the date created or the contents or even the name. So there's a lot of different ways you can create multivariable searches and then save them, which would be fantastic in files, but you just can't do right now on iOS.
Yeah, and especially when it comes to search, I totally agree with the idea of having more view options, and I'm gonna add to that. I would like to have the ability to select different views per folder. So this is an idea, this is a discussion that goes all the way back to the days of the spatial finder.
Sure.
If you remember the old John Siracusa reviews, like the idea of each folder should be able to have its own view settings. Maybe I want to see my downloads as a list, or maybe I want to see my desktop as a grid. So the idea of I want to be able to specify view options and sorting options per folder. There could be a universal setting, but if I really want to, as an advanced user, I would like to have different view options for different folders. So you can imagine things like maybe you have a folder that contains a lot of pictures. That folder should be presented in grid view. Or maybe you have another folder that is your downloads and you just want to have a list of downloads. That idea of letting the user select individual views per individual folders, that would be really nice. Although I don't know if Apple wants to go down this route again on the iPad Pro, and especially again on iOS in general, because it feels like something that they left behind in the macOS 10 days. But as a sort of as a power user, if you will, I think it will be really convenient. And when it comes to search, I would love to be able to do saved searches on iOS and to tokenize certain aspects of search, like you can do in Photos or like you can do in Mail on the Mac, for example, instead of having to to use a syntax or something like that, like a visual editor that lets me create advanced searches with different criteria like file name or metadata or location or type, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And I want to be able to save these searches as like permanent searches in the Files app, just like you can do in the Finder. And I will add an extra step to that I would love to be able, and we're going to talk about this in a few minutes, but I would love to save these searches not only in files, but on the home screen as like permanent shortcuts on the home screen, or even they could be Siri shortcuts in the sense that if you create a saved search on iOS, and this is something that is not possible on the Mac, but iOS being modern and different, it would allow you to do things like create a Siri shortcut for this saved search, and then in the Shortcuts app, you could say, return the files that match this saved search, and you would be able to create workflows that deal with files that match a specific saved search from the Files app and iCloud Drive. So the idea of the saved search that you create is not only a view of the Files app, but it's also data that you can automate in Shortcuts.
Right. It becomes a step of your shortcut. I really like that idea. And, part of what I think we're talking about here is that we want to maximize flexibility. I mean, those saved searches should be savable as a favorite as well in the, in the side panel of the Files app. I mean, you should be able to get at that stuff, whether it's on your home screen, in the Files app, or Shortcuts, wherever you can access files, they ought to be available on iOS. One of the other things that I'd like to see in terms of being able to manage files and deal with sharing is, and this one I'm very hopeful for, because we've heard a lot of rumors about iOS bringing tabbed interfaces to things like the iPad. And I'd love to see that in files, because that would be a great way to just move files from one folder to another. I mean, you can do that already on the Mac, and there's no reason why, if we end up with tabbed interfaces on iOS, that it wouldn't work there as well. And the other thing that really holds me back from going all in on iCloud Drive is that I can't share folders. I mean, you and I have a bunch of projects where we share folders, and there's a whole bunch of stuff in there, a bunch of documents, and we use Dropbox because that's the easiest way for you and I to have access to the same set of files. This podcast, for instance, has a shared Dropbox folder where you and I can go in at any time and see what we've got in there. But you can't do that on iCloud Drive right now.
That's really one of the features that keeps me in Dropbox, just when I want to share something with somebody else. That I cannot believe that iCloud Drive is still limited to single file sharing, and
Right.
it's even surprising because it works well, right? I mean, I share things with iCloud Drive, and it's based on the CloudKit infrastructure, and it's surprisingly solid.
Right. We do use that as well, but not nearly to the extent that we would if we could share folders too.
Yeah, exactly.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by DevonThink, the #1 paperless office solution for your Mac. DevonThink can do it all, managing anything from texts, PDFs, notes, images, and email messages, and even bookmarks. It's a robust application that copes with huge collections. Last summer, I used DevonThink for our big App Store anniversary project, storing hundreds of web archives, PDFs, images, and other data in the app, and it handled it absolutely seamlessly. DevonThink does just so many things really well that it's really hard for me to pick just a few, but I've got a couple of things that I want to talk about and highlight, and I think you'll know why. The first one is that DevonThink lets you capture new information without interrupting your workflow. When you're in the middle of researching something, it's absolutely critical that you don't lose your place or lose your train of thought, and DevonThink helps with that. The app also lets you edit plain and rich text documents and annotate things like PDFs, which is one of my favorite features. But DevonThink goes beyond just capture and editing. It also uses machine learning so that it can automatically classify your files or your documents, which is a huge time saver. On top of all of that, the app has an incredibly powerful, fast search system. Just type in a few characters and your documents just start appearing, making them super easy to access. As your database grows, you'll also appreciate that it synchronizes across all your Macs and DevonThink to Go, the iOS app, securely encrypted and via a whole bunch of different services, including iCloud, Dropbox, and any web dev server or just plain old Wi-Fi. That way, your databases are on all your Macs and available to go on your iOS devices too, even if you don't have a network connection. Oh, and if you're into automating things like we are at Mac Stories, DevonThink is incredibly scriptable. It comes with extensive AppleScript support, so you can do that too. We have a special deal for App Stories listeners who can get DevonThink Pro for 10% off. There'll be a link in the show notes, or you can use this promo code for any of the editions of DevonThink on the Devon Technologies shop. The coupon code is promo-appstories-2019-01 for 10% off. Again, you can get 10% off DevonThink Pro as an App Stories listener by using the promo code promo-appstories-2019-01. There'll also be a link in the show notes. Our thanks to DevonThink for supporting the show.
Is there anything else that you would like to see in the Files app?
I would really like to see the ability to have something similar to the quick actions on the Mac, which was just added with Mojave, but what it does is it surfaces automation right inside the Finder.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Shortcuts still is an app-based system. I would like to see it even deeper inside these operating system. You'd be able to select a file right in Files and launch a shortcut from there. That would be a fantastic use of Files.
Yeah, it would be great to have actions for apps on the writing files. I didn't even think about this, but I would love to have those quick actions. Yeah, I mean, Files it's got some of the features of the Finder, and it's sort of stuck in between this odd mix of some of the functionalities of the Finder, like grid view and list view or tags, but also something modern. So I'm thinking, the integration of the file provider extensions, like how you can easily install new sources from the App Store.
Right.
And the way the developers can customize their file provider extensions. They can add like buttons, or the fact that files can be the root view of apps when they implement the document browser. So I would like Apple to keep this balance of we're not just copying the Finder, but we're making it more modern. But I feel like to an extent there are some problems of file management and the way that you present files and folders to users that more or less they were fixed years ago.
Right.
And so you reach a point where it's fine to try new things and try modern things, but at some point you're just reinventing the wheel. So I think, column view and list view and sorting options, like these problems were fixed decades ago. And so, like it or not, you can try and ship a fancy modern UI that doesn't deal with these complexities. But at the end of the day, if I just want to have a view that uses columns and sorts my files by date modified, there's only so many ways you can ship that feature.
Right.
And so I think it's okay to try new things that are based on apps and the App Store and sandboxing and extensions. But also, I would like Apple to recognize the fact that the Mac and the Finder, they got some things right many years ago, after all.
Right. And why shouldn't iOS kind of cherry pick the best of both worlds, right? And have more options to just work with the way that different people work with their files, because not everybody approaches these things in the same way.
Yeah.
All right, Federico, I want to move over to the home screen because there's some overlap here with files, but what would you like to see changed about the home screen?
So my idea for the new home screen on the iPad in iOS 13 is that I would like Apple to go beyond just saying we are bringing widgets to the home screen. I do want to see widgets on the home screen, but I want to see Apple do more with widgets and do more in general beyond widgets. So I think it's time for the home screen to give more freedom to users. So users should be able to place icons in any layout they want, anywhere they want. They shouldn't have to use, shortcuts and hacks to create blank icons or to create custom layouts. They should be able to place, like on an actual desktop, they should be able to place whatever they want anywhere they want. So that's my underlying philosophy here. I also think that Apple should take the widget system that they currently have for the Today page of iOS and bring widgets to the home screen, but with some improvements. So I was thinking about this, and I think the widgets that you get on iOS are already quite solid. The performance is much improved compared to when they launched in iOS 8. They're more interactive than ever. They support multiple layouts. So they support a compact mode, they support an extended mode. I think Apple should keep building on top of this and enable some key features that are currently not supported by widgets. You should be able to type into a widget. So you should be able to have keyboard access to a widget. Right now, widgets can only be touched in the sense that they do not support keyboard input.
Right.
And that should be supported. You should be able to see actual photo previews from the Photos app or file previews from iCloud Drive inside a widget. Right now, for example, the Shortcuts app, if you use the widget, it cannot show you a full quick look preview of a photo. And in general, I think the idea should be that you can have sort of and this is a common theme if you think about it, based on what we talked about with trends and rich notifications, but you should be able to have a mini app UI on the home screen that gives you access to a feature of an app or a specific view of a specific app without actually having to open the app. So, for example, maybe I want to have the Today view of things, like the Today screen of the Things app,
Right.
on my home screen. But that should not be like a widget that does not support all of the features of the Today view. It should be the actual Today view, like a snippet that sits right there for fast access, because I always use that screen. So the idea of taking widgets and making them more powerful, making them richer, and making them support keyboard input and swipes and gestures, that would be cool, I think. Do you follow me so far?
Yeah, I do. I agree with that 100%. And, I think to me, what really strikes a chord is the idea of scalability. Because one of the things we talked about in our trends episode is scaling apps from the iPhone all the way to the Mac. And what we're really talking about with the home screen in some senses is scaling things within the environment of an iPad, for instance. So what I'd like to see with widgets is the ability to do anything from something super simple, which is not that much different than a watch complication, where Maybe just up in the corner of my iPad, it's got the weather, right? It's just got the current conditions. And there's really nothing that I can do with that other than I see what the weather happens to be. And if I tap it, it takes me to my weather app. Or as you were saying, I have a more complex widget that takes up more space on my home screen and has text input and other things that I can do to interact with it beyond just kind of tapping it and taking me somewhere else as a shortcut. And it's a little bit too, like, I think a little bit like dynamic text, where you can change the way the layout works in any particular app using dynamic text if it's supported. Why not have the home screen do something similar where maybe you've got somebody who doesn't mind having their app icons, crammed together a little closer. Maybe somebody wants a third of their screen to be dedicated to widgets, or 2/3 of the screen dedicated to widgets, or the whole screen dedicated to widgets. Customizability and flexibility in terms of both scale, shape, and size of everything that's on there to let people make the home screen their own, really.
Yeah, totally agree.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Linode. With Linode, you can instantly deploy and manage an SSD server in the Linode cloud. And you can get your server up and running in just seconds with your choice of Linux distro, resources, and node location. Linode has hundreds of thousands of customers, and they're all looked after by Linode's incredible 24/7 support team. If you ever run into any problems, just drop them an email or give them a call or chat over IRC in the Linode community if that's easier. Whatever suits you best. Oh, and they have some super useful guides and support documentation, so if you just need to quickly look something up, you absolutely can. Their new management panel is now out of beta at cloud.linode.com. This new management console is a single-page application built using the cutting-edge React.js stack and is backed entirely by their public API, and it's open source. Plus, they feature two-factor authentication to keep you and all of your data safe and secure. We use Linode at Mac Stories for some of our Slack bots, and it's been perfect for that. It can do everything from our simple Slack bots all the way up to really complex tasks. And you know what? Linode has pricing options to suit everyone. Their plans start at 1 gigabyte of RAM for just $5 a month, and they offer high memory plans starting with 16 gigabytes of RAM. And Linode have a special offer just for you. As a listener of App Stories, you can go to linode.com/appstories and use the promo code AppStories2019 to get $20 toward any Linode plan. On the 1 gigabyte of RAM plan, that's like 4 free months. And with a 7-day money-back guarantee, you really have nothing to lose. So give Linode a try. That's linode.com/appstories and the promo code AppStories2019 to learn more, sign up, and make the most of that $20 credit. Our thanks to Linode for their support of App Stories.
So the idea of more freedom and widgets that are better than the current widget system. I also think there should be a way to add shortcuts in the sense of like app actions that do something in the background or that take you to some place inside of an app. So Siri shortcuts, but on the home screen as for quick access. And they, for example, you may have, a text case shortcut that takes whatever it is you copied, transforms the text right on your home screen and puts it back on the clipboard. So the ability to have actual actions, not just launchers, but actions on your home screen. And also you should be able to add bookmarks to anything. Maybe you want to have a bookmark for a specific PDF that you keep in iCloud Drive. You should be able to add that PDF to your home screen and do something, whether it's a long tap or some other gesture, to preview that PDF right within the home screen. So just like on the Mac, you can put anything on your desktop and then do something with it. I think there's room for Apple to reimagine this idea, make it more modern, make it easier to use for multi-touch and for the iPad, and really refresh the same concept for 2019, essentially. I just want to have this system where I can put anything I want on my home screen, and I can get things done from the home screen without having to just exit apps, open different app, do something, go back to the home screen, do something again. I just want to have a more productive home screen. And finally, I would like to mention that technically speaking, Spotlight Search is part of the same Springboard process that manages a bunch of things on iOS, including the home screen. And I think Spotlight Search should be better integrated with the home screen. Right now, when you're working on the iPad Pro and you hit Command Space, the Spotlight basically takes over as a sort of a full screen search mode. It doesn't feel like it's attached to the home screen. But if the home screen becomes a storage space, if you will, like a personal desktop, I think Spotlight should be able to search that space and should be able to highlight things on your home screen and take you there in a more cohesive way, instead of just saying you can open Spotlight and then you can jump from Spotlight to that result. I want to be able to search my home screen and quickly, select things, especially with the keyboard. So I'm imagining a process where there's the concept of selection in the iOS UI. Like you can select with the arrow keys, for example, you can select something. And I think it really clicks the idea once you consider the fact that a lot of people use the iPad Pro connected to a smart keyboard or to an external keyboard. Yet you're not able to even select icons on your home screen right now.
Right.
But if Apple were to truly embrace the keyboard, there should be a way to select items on screen from the keyboard using the spacebar or the arrow keys or the return key. So I can imagine this home screen that is full of items, of different items, with my own layout, with widgets, with icons, with apps, with actions, with shortcuts, whatever I want. And yes, I can touch them, but I can also navigate my home screen using Spotlight or using just plain navigation from my external keyboard. And I can get things done from the keyboard without having to constantly reach for the screen. And before you argue that Apple would never do this, I urge you to consider the fact that Apple makes their own keyboard for the iPad Pro. And how come that the same company that makes the keyboard also makes it difficult to use the keyboard with the iPad?
Yeah.
That's a strange compromise when you think about it, because if you make a keyboard, keyboards are for hands to rest on, not for fingers to constantly leave and reach for the display. So if you make the keyboard, you should make the iPad easier to use with a keyboard. And so if that's the logical conclusion, then I guess that the home screen should also better support keyboard navigation and selection.
Yeah, it's funny because it took Apple a long time, I think, to really fully embrace the desktop as a full-fledged member of the Finder community, basically. And some of what we're talking about in a way is ground that's already been covered on the Mac. And what it comes down to, I think, at the end of the day, is we want it to be more flexible. Whether you're talking about folders within folders, which is another thing I'd like to see, or a little bit better implementation of Command Tab, because Command Tab, for instance, right now, if you do have an app in Slide Over, that's not going to show up in your Command Tab, which is a little weird because you go back to your home screen and your Slide Over app isn't available from the home screen. But if you open up another app, you can swipe over and get to it again. There's just a few things like that I feel are a little rough that could be addressed as well. All right, Federico, that is a good discussion because I think it really kicks off some of the things that we really want to see come to iOS 13. If we even get a quarter of those, I would be happy. But the Files app and the home screen are two places where you and I both really want to see a lot of change this year.
Yeah, totally agree.
I want to thank our sponsors again, Devon Think and Linode, for supporting the show. And as always, you can find me and Federico writing over at macstories.net. Federico and I are also available on Twitter and Instagram with the same handle for both places. It's very convenient. Mm-hmm. It's like we thought about it in advance, isn't it?
Go figure.
Federico is at Fetici on both. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees, JOHN VOORHEES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.